bring food to you.
No. Money.
Elijah Mackenzie found them at sunset. Two Apache women collapsed 30 feet from his fire, close enough to smell the beans cooking but too weak to crawl the final distance. The younger one wasn't breathing right. The older one looked at him with eyes that expected nothing, because expecting anything from a white man with a gun was how you got yourself killed. He had three choices: walk away and let the desert finish what starvation had started, shoot them quick and call it mercy, or break the one rule he'd followed for 5 years straight: never let anyone close enough to matter. His hand moved toward the rifle mounted on his chuck wagon. The older woman didn't flinch, didn't beg, just kept her eyes locked on his, waiting for the decision that would end one way or another in the next 10 seconds. Then the younger one made a sound, not quite a moan, not quite a word, just the noise a body makes when it's surrendering to death and doesn't have the strength left to fight. Elijah knew that sound, had heard it once before, 5 years ago, from his 7-year-old daughter's throat as poison shut down her small body while he held her and couldn't do a goddamn thing except watch her die. He lowered the rifle. How long since you ate? His voice was rough from disuse, from talking only to ghosts and sourdough starter and the empty desert that never answered back. The older woman's lips moved. No sound came out. She tried again, days, 4, 5. The younger one's eyes rolled back. Her body went slack. Elijah moved, then not thinking, just moving, just doing what Cookie does when someone's dying in front of him, and there's still a chance, still a sliver of possibility that he might not fail this time, might not be too late, might not have to bury anyone else because he was 50 yards away gathering firewood when the people who mattered most were dying. He bent down and lifted the younger woman. She weighed nothing, just bones wrapped in deerskin and desperation, and skin so hot with fever he could feel it through his shirt. The older one tried to stand, stumbled, tried again. Elijah caught her with his free arm. "Can you walk?" She nodded, leaning her full weight against him. 10 feet. That's all I need. 10 feet to the fire and I can help you. But you have to make it 10 feet. She made it 8 feet before her legs gave out completely. Elijah half-carried, half-dragged both of them to the edge of his camp, but not into the sacred circle. Not past the ring of stones that marked the boundary of Cookie's domain, where the rules still applied and order still mattered. And maybe, just maybe, if he followed every regulation perfectly enough, his wife and daughter would somehow be less dead. He settled them just outside the boundary, propped against his water barrel. "Don't move," he ordered. "I'll bring food to you." The older woman grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak but desperate. "No. Money. Didn't ask for any. Why? Help. Because I'm Cookie. And Cookie feeds people who need feeding. That's the rule." He returned to his fire where beans had been simmering since dawn, beans he'd cooked for no one because there was no one there. Hadn't been anyone for 5 years except 4 tin plates and conversations with the dead and the stubborn, irrational belief that if he just kept the routine going, kept following every rule, kept the sourdough alive, then maybe the universe would notice he was doing everything right and give him back what it had taken. But the universe didn't work that way. Elijah knew that, had known it for 5 years, still couldn't stop himself from setting out 4 plates every single meal. He ladled beans not from the main pot but from a smaller one at the edge of the coals. Beans cooked longer, softer, easier on stomachs that had forgotten what food felt like. Added water to thin them into broth. Crumbled cornbread until it dissolved into mush. 2 tin cups of water. Not too much. Too much would make them vomit everything back up. He carried it all on a wooden tray carved with flowers that his daughter used to trace with her fingers while waiting for supper. Back when there was a daughter. Back when there was waiting. Back when life was something that happened instead of something you survived by following rules and cooking for ghosts. The older woman took the bowl with shaking hands. Fed her sister first. Small spoonfuls, coaxing her awake with whispered Apache words that Elijah didn't understand but recognized as the universal language of sisters who'd protected each other since birth and weren't about to stop. Now, not even when dying would be easier. The younger one's eyes fluttered open, confused, frightened. Then she smelled the food and something animal took over. She lunged for the bowl, trying to shove it into her mouth all at once, trying to eat 4 days of starvation in 4 seconds. "Slow," Elijah commanded. "Too fast and you'll vomit. Small bites. Trust me." The older sister translated in broken Apache mixed with Spanish, mixed with desperate gestures. The younger one forced herself to slow down, tears streaming down her face as she ate, like the simple act of receiving food without cruelty attached was more than her broken heart could handle. Elijah turned away, returned to his fire, stirred beans that didn't need stirring, added wood to a fire that was already hot enough, checked Dutch ovens that were exactly where he'd left them, anything to avoid watching them cry. Because if he watched them cry, he might remember that he used to be the kind of man who cared when strangers suffered, who felt things, who wasn't just a collection of rules and routines and grief shaped into something that looked human from a distance, but was really just an empty shell going through motions that used to mean something. Thank you. The older sister's voice was already stronger. We would have died. Maybe. Elijah didn't turn around. But you didn't. Eat. Rest. Morning's soon enough for questions. He didn't ask their names, didn't ask where they'd come from or why 2 Apache women were dying of thirst in territory that should have been familiar. Didn't ask anything because asking meant caring and caring meant staying and staying meant loss. Always loss. Every single time. The desert night settled around them like a blanket. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched Elijah bury his wife and daughter under a sky that didn't care about cowboy rules or poisoned water, or fathers who failed the one job that mattered. He fed them again at full dark. More beans, more cornbread softened in broth. A little salt pork he'd been saving for no particular reason, because there was no one to save it for. They ate. They thanked him. They asked if they could help with dishes. No. The word came out sharper than he'd intended. Then softer cookies rules. No one touches equipment. You want to help, you sit there and get strong. That's your job. The older sister studied him with eyes that saw too much. What's your name? Elijah hesitated. Names meant connection. Connection meant people staying. People staying meant caring. Caring meant loss when they inevitably left or died or disappeared, because that's what people did. They left one way or another, and you were alone again with nothing but the rules and the routine and the sourdough starter that had somehow survived longer than the people who made it. But Cookie's second rule: a man who feeds you deserves your name in return. Elijah Mackenzie. I'm Ayasha. This is Kimama. My sister. Apache Miscalero Band. 3 days north. Long way from home. Something hard flashed across Ayasha's face. We don't have a home anymore. Elijah nodded slowly. He understood that. Home was something that existed only in the past tense. A place you'd been once. A thing you'd lost. A word that hurt too much to say out loud. Well, he said, turning back to his fire, to his routine, to the 4 tin plates waiting for 3 people and 1 ghost. Tonight this is home enough. Sleep under the wagon, blankets in back. We'll talk when you're stronger. They slept. He didn't. Just sat by his fire, keeping watch, maintaining the perimeter, following the rules, because the rules were all he had left. And if he broke them, he didn't know what he'd become. Something worse than alone, probably. Something worse than broken. At dawn he woke them with coffee, so strong it could strip paint. They drank it without complaint, because people who'd been dying of thirst 24 hours ago didn't complain about bitter coffee. You talk in your sleep, Ayasha said, watching him with those 2 knowing eyes. I know. You told someone named Beth her biscuits were ready. Elijah's hands stilled over the sourdough starter he'd been checking. Yeah. Old habit. 5 years is a long time to keep a habit. Some habits don't break. He stirred the starter, checking the bubbles, the smell, the consistency. My wife made this. My daughter helped feed it every morning. They've been dead 5 years. Starter's still alive. Funny how that works. Why didn't it die? Kimama asked softly, her first words since collapsing at his camp. Why didn't you let it die with them? The question cut deeper than she probably intended. Elijah kept his eyes on the crock, on the living culture that smelled like Noah, like Beth, like mornings when his daughter would stick her nose in and announce whether the bread pet was happy or grumpy, based on how many bubbles it had. Because he said, finally, it's the only thing they left me that's still breathing. Everything else is bones and memories and 4 tin plates I can't stop setting out. But this, he touched the crock gently, this is alive. Long as I keep it alive, they're not completely gone. That's beautiful, Kimama whispered. That's insane, Elijah corrected. But it's all I've got. He mixed flour into the starter, added water, stirred with his finger because Cookie had to feel the dough had to be connected to it. Couldn't rely on spoons and measurements and anything that created distance between the food and the hands that made it. I'm going to teach you something, he announced, suddenly, surprising himself. How to make biscuits from this starter, Beth's favorite food in the world. But you have to promise me something first. Anything, Ayasha said. When you leave here, when you figure out where you're going, you take some of this starter with you. You keep it alive. You feed it every day. You make bread from it. And you remember it came from a woman named Noah, who could make beans taste like love, and a little girl named Beth, who believed bread was magic. Both sisters stared at him like he'd just offered them something holy. We promise, Kimama said. Good. Elijah pulled out his flour sack. Then let's make some biscuits. And I'll tell you about the night my family died and why I've been cooking for ghosts ever since. And why 2 Apache strangers showing up half dead at my camp is either the worst thing that could happen or the best thing. I honestly don't know which yet. The sun climbed higher. The dough came together under 3 pairs of hands instead of 1. And for the first time in 5 years, Elijah Mackenzie began to tell his story to people who were alive enough to hear it. He told them about Noah, how she'd been half Navajo, half white, belonging fully to neither world but carving out a space of her own anyway. How her family had disowned her for marrying a drifter cook who smelled like campfire smoke and had nothing to offer except calloused hands and the ability to make decent biscuits. He told them about Beth, 7 years old with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. How she'd loved helping in the kitchen standing on an overturned bucket so she could reach the chuck box, her small hands covered in flour, as she learned to knead dough. And he told them about the night everything ended. I was cookie for the Thompson cattle drive. Big operation. 60 cowboys, 800 head of cattle. Trail boss let Noah and Beth come along because Noah was useful, could sew, treat injuries, help with laundry. Wasn't common, but Thompson was a decent man. Said family shouldn't be separated if it could be helped. Elijah's hands moved automatically as he spoke, cutting biscuits with Beth's tin cup, placing them in the Dutch oven, with the care of a man handling sacred objects. One night we camped at a waterhole. I went out gathering firewood, good dry mesquite for morning biscuits. Was gone maybe an hour. When I came back, his voice caught. Kimama reached out like she might touch his arm, then remembered the rules and pulled back. Raiders had hit the camp. Just 4 or 5 of them trying to steal horses. Cowboys fought them off, shot one of them dead. The rest fled. But before they left, they poisoned our water barrel. Dumped rat poison in it. Revenge for killing their man. The morning went very still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Nobody knew until it was too late. 7 people drank from that barrel. 2 died. My wife, my daughter. The others survived, Ayasha asked gently. Yeah, the young strong ones made it, but Noah was small. Beth was 7. The poison. He stopped. Started again. Doctor said if they'd gotten help faster, maybe the kid could have been saved. But I was off gathering firewood, 50 yards away collecting kindling while they were dying. That's not your fault, Kimama said. I was cookie. Elijah's voice was flat final. My job was keeping the food and water safe. That was the one job, the only job that really mattered, and I failed. He placed the Dutch oven in the coals, shoveled more coals on top. His movements were precise, controlled the actions of a man who'd rebuilt his entire life around routine, because routine meant he couldn't fail again if there was no one left to fail. After they died, I couldn't stay with the drive. Couldn't look at that water barrel. Couldn't cook for men who were alive when my family wasn't. Trail boss gave me this chuck wagon, said take all the time I needed. That was 5 years ago. And you've been here ever since, Ayasha asked. Not here exactly. I drift some. But mostly, yeah. I stop at this crossroads because it's nowhere. No people. No memories except the ones I bring with me. Just me and the beans and the sourdough and the rules. And 4 plates, Kimama said quietly. And 4 plates. The biscuits baked. The smell filled the morning air, yeasty, buttery, achingly familiar. When Elijah finally pulled the Dutch oven from the coals and lifted the lid, the biscuits were perfect. Golden brown, risen tall, exactly like Noah used to make them. He split one open. Steam rose. The inside was layered and fluffy, everything a biscuit should be. He took a bite. Closed his eyes. That's it, he whispered. That's exactly right. Beth, honey, these turned out good. You'd be proud of your old man. When he opened his eyes, both sisters were watching him with expressions that weren't pity. Thank God, not pity, but something closer to recognition. The look of people who understood that grief wasn't something you got over. It was something you learned to carry. Tell us, Ayasha said, why you left your tribe, why you were dying in my desert. The sisters exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passed between them, the kind of shorthand that only comes from a lifetime of being each other's only ally. I fell in love, Kimama said finally, with a Mexican trader who came through our territory every spring. He was kind, respectful, made me laugh. We wanted to marry. Your family didn't approve, Elijah guessed. I was promised to an Apache warrior, a man my father chose, a man who was strong and brave in battle, and she paused, choosing words carefully cruel when no eyes were watching. Ayasha's voice was hard. I told our father that forcing Kimama to marry a man she feared was wrong, that she should choose her own husband, that the old ways were killing us as surely as bullets. What did he say? He said if Kimama married outside the tribe, she was no longer his daughter, no longer Apache, no longer family. Kimama's hands twisted in her lap. I told him I'd rather be no one than be that warrior's wife. So Ayasha and I left together. Sisters don't abandon sisters. We traveled for weeks, Ayasha continued. Found the trader in Santa Fe. Kimama was so happy. She thought she'd finally have the life she wanted. The silence that followed told Elijah everything. He was already married, Kimama whispered. Had a wife, a baby. He'd been married for 2 years. I was just entertainment when he passed through. Someone to flirt with. Someone who didn't matter. We'd given up everything for a lie, Ayasha said bitterly. Our family. Our home. Our people. For a man who never cared at all. So you tried to go back? Yes. But when we reached the edge of our territory, scouts saw us. They turned away. Wouldn't speak to us. Wouldn't acknowledge us. We're dead to our people. Ghosts. Kimama's voice broke. So we walked. Didn't know where we were going. Just walked because staying still meant accepting it was over. We ran out of food. Ran out of water. And then we saw smoke from your fire and smelled beans cooking, and we thought, maybe, we could make it just a little farther. And here you are, Elijah said. And here we are. 2 dead women having breakfast with a dead man. Elijah surprised himself by almost smiling. Yeah, that about sums it up. They ate biscuits in silence. The food was good, better than good. The kind of meal that reminded you why staying alive was worth the effort. The kind of meal that made you believe just for a moment that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. These are perfect, Kimama said, splitting open her second biscuit and watching steam rise. Your daughter had good taste. She did. Used to eat 3 in a row, said they tasted like clouds. She was right. They stayed. Days became a week. A week became 2. Elijah cooked. They ate. They recovered their strength, their color, their ability to walk more than 10 feet without collapsing. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the rules began to bend. First, Ayasha started washing dishes. Elijah protested, but she ignored him, scrubbing tin plates in the wreck pan with sand and water until they gleamed. I'm just helping, she said when he objected. You can't do everything alone. I've been doing everything alone for 5 years, and look how well that's worked out. He didn't have an answer for that. Then Kimama began helping with food preparation, peeling potatoes, chopping onions, sorting beans. She worked quietly just outside the 10-foot sacred boundary, respecting Cookie's space while still making herself useful. Elijah pretended to be annoyed, but the truth was having help made the work go faster, made the silence less oppressive, made his chuck wagon feel less like a tomb and more like what it used to be, a place where food was made and people gathered and life happened. One morning, Kimama stood at the edge of the boundary and asked, "Will you teach me to make biscuits the way your wife made them?" "No, why not?" "Because you'd have to touch the sourdough starter." So nobody touches the sourdough. You said family could touch it. Your wife, your daughter." Elijah's hands stilled over the dough he was kneading. "You're not family." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Hurt flashed across Kimama's face. Ayasha's expression went cold. "You're right," Ayasha said quietly. "We're not your family. Your family is dead, and you want to keep them that way, frozen in time, frozen in sourdough, that you won't let anyone else touch. Because if other people touch it, it means you're moving forward, and moving forward means forgetting them." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Elijah wanted to argue, wanted to yell, wanted to explain that she didn't understand anything about loss or grief, or what it meant to fail the people you loved most. But he couldn't, because she was right. He'd been keeping Noah and Beth alive by keeping everything exactly the same. Same routine, same rules, same 4 plates. If he changed anything, if he let anyone in, if he allowed the chuck wagon to become something new instead of a shrine to what was lost, then they'd be truly dead. And he'd be truly alone. And he didn't know if he could survive. I'm sorry, he said finally. You're right. About all of it. Ayesha's anger deflated. No, I'm sorry. You saved our lives. We have no right to judge how you grieve. But you're not wrong. Elijah looked at the sourdough crock, the thing he'd guarded for 7 years like a holy relic. Noah made this starter. Took her 6 months to get it right. Used wild barley and honey from a hive she found in a dead tree. Beth helped feed it every morning, called it her bread pet. He picked up the crock, held it carefully. The day I became head cookie for the Thompson Drive, they gave me this. Beth said I had to promise to feed it every single day like a real pet. I promised, and I've kept that promise for 7 years, even after they died, especially after they died. Because it's the last living thing they touched, Kimama said softly. Yeah, and if it dies, they're completely gone. No sourdough, no Noah, no Beth. Just me and memories that get hazier every year. But sourdough isn't meant to be kept by one person, Ayesha said gently. It's meant to be shared, split, given away. That's how it survives for generations. Elijah stared at the crock, at the bubbling culture inside, that smelled like his wife, like his daughter, like mornings when everything was whole. You're right, he said quietly. Noah used to say that. Said bread was meant to bring people together, that keeping it to yourself defeated the whole purpose. He took a breath, made a decision that terrified him. I'll teach you to make biscuits, but you have to promise me something. Anything, Kimama said. When you leave here, when you figure out where you're going, you take some of this starter with you. You keep it alive, you feed it every day. You make bread from it, and you remember it came from Noah and Beth. You remember they would have wanted their bread shared with good people who needed it. Both sisters' eyes filled with tears. We promise, Ayesha said. We swear it, Kimama added. Elijah opened the crock. The sharp, clean smell of fermentation filled the air. Then let's make some biscuits, and I'll teach you everything Noah taught me. He showed them how to tell if the starter was active, the bubbles, the smell, the way it rose and fell like breathing. How to mix it with flour and fat until it formed shaggy dough. How to fold it gently so the biscuits would be tender, not tough. How to cut them close together so they'd rise tall. Kimama's hands shook when she first touched the starter, like she understood she was touching something sacred. Something that had survived tragedy and time and one man's desperate need to keep his family alive through flour and water and wild yeast. They placed the biscuits in the Dutch oven, buried it in coals, waited the eternal 20 minutes while they baked. When Elijah lifted the lid, the biscuits were perfect, golden, risen, exactly like Noah's. Kimama split one open, tasted it, her eyes closed. Oh, she whispered. Oh, these are perfect, Ayesha finished. These are perfect. Elijah took a bite of his own biscuit. The familiar taste hit him like a wave butter and salt and that subtle sour tang from the starter. Beth's favorite food. The thing she'd ask for every morning even when they had bacon or eggs or anything else to offer. You did good, honey, he said to the empty air. These turned out just right. They ate biscuits until the batch was gone. Then Kimama made another batch, and those were even better because she was learning, understanding how the dough should feel, how much to handle it, when to stop. And Elijah realized something that both broke his heart and began to heal it. He was teaching someone Noah's recipes, passing on what she'd given him, keeping her alive not by freezing her in memory, but by letting her knowledge flow forward into new hands, new kitchens, new lives. It was the opposite of everything he'd been doing for 5 years, and it felt like breathing after being underwater. The days passed. The sisters grew stronger. They learned more recipes. Noah's beans with the extra cumin, her cornbread with honey, her way of making coffee that was strong, but never bitter. They learned the chuck wagon rules and followed them. Learned when Elijah needed silence, and when he needed conversation. Learned to read his moods the way you learn to read weather. And Elijah, despite every wall he'd built, despite every promise he'd made to never let anyone close again, found himself getting used to having them around. Found himself setting 3 plates instead of 4. Found himself smiling when Kimama messed up a batch of beans, and Ayesha teased her about it. Found himself impossibly healing. Then the riders came. Elijah saw them, first 2 Apache warriors on the horizon, moving fast and purposeful. His hand went to his rifle, but Ayasha touched his arm. "Wait," she said. "Those are scouts from our tribe." The warriors rode up and dismounted. They spoke only to the sisters' rapid Apache that Elijah couldn't follow. But he caught enough from their tone and body language command expectation, no room for negotiation. The conversation grew heated. Kimama was shaking her head. Ayasha stood straighter, her voice sharp and defiant. Finally, one warrior turned to Elijah and said in broken English, "White man should leave. Tribal business." "This is my camp," Elijah replied calmly. "They're under my protection. You cannot protect them from their father's command. Watch me." The warrior's hand moved toward his knife. Ayasha stepped between them, speaking urgently in Apache. The tension stretched tight, ready to snap. Then Ayasha turned to Elijah and explained in English, "My father has sent for us. The warrior I was promised to has died in a hunting accident. Father says there's no longer any dishonor. He wants us to return. So you're going back. They're ordering us back. Without apology. Without admitting what they did was wrong. Just expecting us to come running because the problem solved itself." "What do you want to do?" Ayasha looked at her sister. That wordless communication again. "We'll return," Ayasha told the warriors in English, so Elijah could understand. "But only for harvest season. To help our people with the work. To fulfill our obligations as daughters of the tribe. Your father demands immediate. Our father can demand whatever he wants. This is our offer. We'll come for harvest. 1 month. Then we return here." The lead warrior's face darkened. "You cannot make conditions. We just did. Take our offer to father. He can accept it or reject it. But we won't be dragged back like disobedient children." Kimama added, "Tell father we love our people. We love our tribe. But we're not his property. We'll help because we choose to. Not because he commands it." The warriors looked furious but uncertain. They'd expected submission. Expected gratitude, expected anything except this quiet, firm defiance. 3 days, the lead warrior finally said. "We return in 3 days for your answer. If you refuse, we'll take you by force. If father wants a war over 2 daughters, that's his choice," Ayasha said coldly. "But he'll have to answer to the tribal council about why he'd risk young warriors' lives for his pride." The warriors rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Elijah waited until they were gone before asking, "You really going back?" "For a time," Kimama said, "to see if father has changed, to make peace if we can, to prove we're still Apache, even if we chose a different path. And if he hasn't changed, then we'll know we tried," Ayasha said, "that we were honorable, that we chose connection over pride." She paused. "Elijah, can we come back, after harvest, if we wanted to?" The question caught him off guard. "Come back here, to a chuck wagon in the middle of nowhere?" "It's not nowhere," Kimama said softly. "It's home. The first place we've felt safe in months. The first place where someone fed us without expecting anything in return. Besides," Ayasha added with a small smile, "we promised to keep the sourdough alive. Can't do that if we're wandering around lost." Elijah felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been sealed shut for 5 years, buried under grief and guilt and the stubborn belief that if he just followed the rules perfectly enough, maybe his family would come back. But they weren't coming back. They were gone. And no amount of perfect biscuits or precisely maintained routine would change that. What he could do was let other people in. Let them share the fire and the food and the recipes. Let them become something new while honoring what was old. "Yeah," he heard himself say. "Yeah, you can come back. Anytime you want." "Even though we're not family?" Kimama asked quietly. Elijah looked at the chuck wagon, at the fire where they'd cooked together for 2 weeks, at the sourdough crock that had fed 3 people instead of ghosts. "Maybe you are family," he said. "Maybe family isn't just blood. Maybe it's also who shows up when you're dying, who learns your recipes, who makes biscuits that taste like Beth's favorite thing in the world." Kimama was crying. "She would have liked us, I think. She would have loved you. Both of you." That night, Elijah did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He pulled out 2 small ceramic crocks he'd bought once but never used back. When he still thought maybe he'd split the sourdough, pass it on. Do what Noah had always said you were supposed to do with starter. He opened his main crock, scooped out a generous portion into the first small crock, then another portion into the second. "This is yours," he said, handing one to Kimama. "Feed it every day. Flour and water. Keep it warm. It'll last forever if you care for it." He gave the second crock to Ayasha. "And this is yours. When you make bread from it, remember it came from Noah and Beth. Remember, they wanted good food shared with good people. Both sisters held their crocks like they were cradling children. We'll never let them die, Kimama promised. We swear it. I know. Elijah stirred his own crock, the mother starter, that now had daughters. And when you come back, if you come back, we'll mix them together. Make bread from all three starters combined. That's how sourdough gets stronger. By being split and reunited. By living in different places and coming together. Like family, Ayasha said. Yeah, like family. They left at dawn. Elijah packed them supplies, dried beans, cornbread, salt pork, a small pot for cooking. He showed them how to make coffee over an open fire, how to tell if water was safe, how to cook beans slow enough that they wouldn't burn, all the things Cookie taught his crew, all the survival knowledge he'd accumulated over 40 years of keeping cowboys alive on the trail. As they shouldered their packs, Kimama turned back. Elijah, thank you. For everything. For saving us. For teaching us. For letting us matter. You saved me too, he said. Just took me a while to notice. They walked into the desert, two sisters with packs on their backs and sourdough in their hands, heading toward a father who might never apologize and a tribe that might not want them, and an uncertain future that was still better than dying in the sand. Elijah watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he returned to his chuck wagon and did something that hurt and healed in equal measure. He removed the fourth plate from his table, the small one with the chip in the rim, Beth's plate. He wrapped it carefully in cloth and placed it in the supply box, not because he was forgetting her, but because she was gone and the world kept turning, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor the dead by feeding the living. He kept 3 plates out, 1 for him, 2 for the sisters who might come back. He stirred his sourdough, fed it, set it by the fire to stay warm. Noah, he said to the desert wind. Beth, I split the starter today. Gave pieces to Ayasha and Kimama. Hope that's okay. Think you'd like them. The wind carried the smell of creosote and distant rain. I'm going to try something different. Going to stop cooking for ghosts. Going to cook for people who are alive, who might come back, who might stay. He paused, listening to the silence that had kept him company for 5 years. Doesn't mean I'm forgetting you. Just means I'm finally understanding what you tried to teach me. That food is meant to be shared. That starter survives by being given away. That love doesn't die when people do, it just changes shape. The sun climbed higher. The day stretched out. Elijah had beans to cook, bread to make, a camp to maintain. But for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't just going through motions. He was cooking with purpose, with possibility. With the fragile hope that maybe he could be more than a ghost haunting his own fire. Maybe he could be Cookie again. For real this time. For people who needed feeding. Not perfect. Not without grief. But alive. 6 months later, 2 figures appeared on the horizon at sunset. Elijah saw them coming from a mile away. His heart, which had learned not to hope too much, began beating faster anyway. They were carrying packs, walking steadily, and each of them carried a ceramic crock, wrapped carefully in cloth. Ayasha and Kimama arrived at his camp and set down their packs with matching grins. We're back, Kimama announced. And look, we kept them alive. She held up her crock, opened it. The smell of active sourdough rose up, sour and clean and alive. Fed it every single day, Ayasha said, showing hers. Made bread for the whole tribe. Father said it was the best bread he'd ever eaten, though he'd die before admitting it came from a white man's recipe. Elijah felt his throat tighten. How long can you stay? As long as you'll have us, Ayasha said. Father gave us his blessing. Said we'd earned our freedom by helping with harvest, by proving we could be Apache and still choose our own path. And what path is that, this one? Kimama gestured at the chuck wagon. Learning to cook. Building something new. Being family to a stubborn Cookie, who still needs people even if he won't admit it. Elijah wanted to say something profound about second chances and chosen family and sourdough as metaphor for survival. Instead, he said, good. I could use the help. Been working on a new stew recipe and can't get the spices right. They laughed. They unpacked. They set their sourdough crocks next to his on the workspace. 3 crocks in a row. 3 families merged into one. That night, Elijah did something Noah had told him about, but he'd never tried. He took all 3 starters and mixed them together in one large bowl. Stirred them gently until they became one culture stronger than any individual part, carrying the history of 3 different paths that had somehow converged. The bread they made from that combined starter was the best Elijah had ever tasted. Rich, complex, layers of flavor that couldn't exist without all three starters contributing something unique. They ate it around the fire, sitting cross-legged on the ground like cowboys had done for 100 years. Tin plates, strong coffee, stars emerging overhead. "This is really good," Kimama said through a mouthful of bread. "This is the best bread I've ever had." "Beth would agree," Elijah said. Then softer, "She would have loved you both. Would have dragged you into every bit of mischief she could find. Would have made you promise to be her aunts. We would have loved her back," Ayasha said. "Yeah, you would have." They sat in comfortable silence, three people who'd all lost everything and found each other in the emptiness. A month later, more figures appeared on the horizon. An old Apache man on a painted horse, followed by two younger warriors who looked nervous about approaching a white man's camp. Elijah recognized the older man immediately by the way Ayasha and Kimama went very still. Their father had come. The old man dismounted, slowly studying the chuck wagon, the fire, the three people, sitting around it with bread and coffee. He spoke in Apache to his daughters. They responded. A long conversation Elijah couldn't follow, but he watched body language, the father's initial stiffness softening the daughter's defensive posture, relaxing walls coming down on both sides. Finally, the father turned to Elijah and spoke in careful English. "My daughters say you teach them, feed them, give them home when I send them away. I gave them food when they needed it," Elijah said. "They gave me a reason to cook for someone besides ghosts. Fair trade." The old man studied him for a long moment. "Then you are good man. Daughters are safe with you. They're safe because they're strong. I just provide the beans." Something that might have been a smile crossed the father's weathered face. He reached into a pack and pulled out a rolled hide, revealing intricate beadwork, a ceremonial belt given to honor significant occasions. "This is from my wife," he said, offering it to Elijah. "She say thank you for keeping daughters alive, for teaching them, for being family when we are not." Elijah took the belt carefully. "Tell your wife her daughters saved my life as much as I saved theirs." The father turned to his daughters, said something in Apache that made Kimama's eyes fill with tears. "What did he say?" Elijah asked after the father rode away. "He said, 'You have found good path. Walk it with honor.'" Kimama wiped her eyes. "It's the closest he'll ever come to apologizing. But it's enough." That evening they made a feast. Beans and cornbread and sourdough biscuits, roasted rabbit, wild onions, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. As the fire burned low, Elijah looked at the two women who'd stumbled into his camp 6 months ago, more dead than alive, and realized something fundamental had changed. He wasn't alone anymore, wasn't cooking for ghosts. He was part of something living, something that honored what was lost without being destroyed by it. "You know what Noah used to say?" he asked. "She said the best meals aren't the fanciest ones. They're the ones where everyone leaves fuller than they came. Not just their stomachs, their hearts too." "She was wise," Ayasha said. "She'd like what we've become," Elijah said, looking at the 3 sourdough crocks lined up together. "I think she sent you to me. 2 women dying in the desert who needed food, and 1 stubborn fool who needed a reason to stop cooking for the dead and start feeding the living. They sat together until the stars filled the sky. 3 people who'd been broken in different ways, who'd found each other in the emptiness, who'd learned that family wasn't always the people you were born to. Sometimes family was who showed up when you were dying, who learned your recipes, who kept your sourdough alive." The chuck wagon sat in the desert for many more years, long after Ayasha and Kimama brought their own families to visit children who called Elijah grandfather and learned to make biscuits using starter that had fed 4 generations. The sourdough survived, fed daily, split and shared, carried to new homes, and always brought back to mix together to strengthen, to remind everyone that some things could outlast anything if you loved them enough to share them. And Elijah Mackenzie, cookie, widower, father, friend, finally understood what Noah had been trying to teach him all along. The best way to keep someone alive wasn't to freeze them in time. It was to feed the next person who stumbled out of the desert with empty hands and an emptier stomach and a heart that had forgotten what kindness tasted like. 1 bowl of beans at a time, 1 biscuit at a time, 1 family at a time. Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.